having given a similar presentation at this training a few times, I've found that the material about recruitment is often the most needed or interesting to this group. So I'm going to focus mostly on recruitment, but I'm going to contextualize that with the general process of recruiting and making sure volunteer engagement is positive and engaging, because as you as you know or can guess, keeping people engaged and coming back is way more efficient than continuing to recruit new folks. We really like to have new volunteers, but having a cadre of folks who return really bolster our capacity. And so I'll be talking about sort of the life cycle of volunteers also through this presentation. But I will focus on recruitment a little bit more heavily than the other components. First, I'm going to talk about motivational factors. People do. There's a lot of theory of human motivation. I combined a bunch of different types of motivational theory into something that fits for sort of our environmental, aquatic situations. And I think it pertains to most of our volunteers. Of course, this would be different with different types of volunteer programming slightly. But the basics and the goal here is to provide experiences, those volunteer events that Paul was talking about, provide a structure that allows for most of these motivational factors to be leveraged in one way or another. You never know when a volunteer is going to show up and have one motivational factor be their primary interest. And then the next time they show up, or a different volunteer is going to have a different interest. So the more you can hit on different motivational factors, the more success you're going to have in having them have a good time and a relevant experience, which loads your dice in having them return to a future event. So for individuals, the primary motivational factors are, as we know in our work, the primary reason that most folks come to us is impact. They want to know that they're getting something done. They're participating in a useful endeavor, and the work that they're doing is having some type of relevant real-world impact. And of course, water quality monitoring is hard to associate with future improvements in water quality. It's a very long time frame. However, it is possible to make those connections for the volunteers and make their experience relevant to larger goals. So having that conversation with them and touching on how their work is playing into larger programmatic improvement or environmental improvement is really important. Social motivation is people, we're all social species. People like to get together, make friends. Sometimes people who move to an area or older adults are looking to increase their social circles. So offering the opportunity for people to have a good experience with other people. Actually, these outings are ideally created, or when created, are ideal for creating social cohesion. Small teams, or the getting to know experts or other people who are passionate about similar interests, all go very far to creating social cohesion. This is one of the biggest recruitment methods that we have, both in creating friends in our volunteers, but also having families come out and volunteer together. Young ones can do picking, and it's great, and it's a great way for parents to let their kids know what their morals and values are, and make a good impact at the same time. Learning and teaching are sort of the two sides of the same coin. As we're all learning all the time, and it is a primary driver for a lot of folks, especially younger people who are interested in getting involved in new endeavors. So making sure that they have an opportunity to learn not just the technical side, but as Tamara's going to go into later, some of the bugs, maybe some riverine ecology, whatever you have on hand in your own knowledge base, or your other advanced volunteers, the volunteers that have been around, allow them the opportunity to teach the new volunteers. And the flip side is, as your volunteers or your staff or your young people get to know the content well, make sure that you give them the opportunity to teach others. That's what Paul was talking about sort of our leaders and collectors, our advanced volunteers at the Huron. They're given the opportunity to go and impart their knowledge and their passion onto the newer volunteers, which decentralizes the workload, and which is great. Paul and I can get more done that way. And then, not as relevant to us, but power does come into play with volunteers. I think in our spheres, it's more people that want to have influence, be leaders. At the Watershed Council, it's people who are at the Huron. It's people that want to, help us run programming, or board of directors. Of course, there's always food. Food is very motivating and a common element for all of us. So if an event is over 2 hours long, we try really hard to make sure that there's some snack. And if it's longer than 3 or 4 hours, something that's fairly significant, so people have the opportunity. My predecessor always got the volunteers to bring food, which was a really cool way to engage some of our volunteers. People bring homemade stuff, but you can also buy stuff at the grocery. And then, as it pertains to online work, recruitment, kittens are always a motivating force on the internet. So always keeping people engaged through whatever medium you're working on, or just through fun experiences that are shared. Separate motivation factors between individuals and groups. Groups get together. So say a service club, a local sorority or fraternity, church group, local corporations. There's innumerable folks. We had a couple staff groups from the local from our local mall contact us recently to go and do a river cleanup. So it can be any sort of group that's already cohesive. We get a lot of folks from the YMCA, the Scouts, both Girl and Boy Scouts. And those can be recruitment locations, but their motivational factors, why they're coming out, is slightly different than the individuals. The individual may have the same motivation, but the groups have a group motivation also. So oftentimes they're coming out to do a team building exercise. They want to have some sort of relevant experience where they're getting outside of their work and experiencing something together that's outside of the stresses and the typical constructs of their hierarchy or whatever, and giving them the release of those tried and true systems that they're in when they're at work or whatever, and just coming out and doing something fun with you that can be really meaningful, and help them to have a more successful workplace going forward. Service learning is related to schools, so having school groups come out and do benthic macroinvertebrate work is very appropriate. We get lots of biology classes, chemistry classes. We even make it relevant for statistics classes and things of that nature for college groups. And then some groups are more interested in community recognition. This is kind of akin to greenwashing. We always try to find ways of thanking our groups and our individuals who are volunteering. So putting them on your website, in your newsletter, that sort of stuff. And then a lot of organizations have internal goals for their service. They might have metrics around community service, or some type of dynamics that they're trying to work on internally. Skip one there. Sorry. There we go. Before moving on to actually doing any recruitment or onboarding, it's really important to think about what the job is. What are the volunteers going to be doing? I'm a strong proponent for creating a job description for most volunteer positions. I think if somebody's going to come out and volunteer and collect pick bugs for 2 hours with a team, you don't necessarily need to publicize a formal job description. That seems a little excessive and onerous. However, understanding the components of the job, a la what the job description says, is still useful. If you have an advanced volunteer position, somebody who's going out and leading other groups, you might want a formal job description so that people can see what that position is. But in these sort of episodic and drop-in volunteer engagement, you don't necessarily need a full job description, but thinking through what the components are is going to be really helpful. So just as a reminder, obviously we need a title, what the position is, what the goals are. And here we get into the specifics that are really important, the requirements and the skills and the abilities, being very honest with yourself, with your organization, so that when you go to do recruitment, you can honestly and specifically state exactly what the hours are, what the abilities are, where the what the background abilities of the people need to be able to bring. For pickers, it's very little, but they need to be able to get around on certain types of terrain. If they need to figure out how to get to the place or not, or if you're providing transportation or carpool or facilitating carpooling, all of that sort of stuff is very important in the recruitment component of the volunteer engagement process. And then noting or thinking through what orientation and training is going to be, who this direct supervisor or how supervision is going to work, so that there's no confusion within your organization. Oftentimes, the biggest complaints that are generally heard about volunteer engagement is that when a volunteer shows up, they didn't have anything to do. And I've seen time and time again that it's because nobody was there to tell them what to do. And so having that supervisor or the point person on site and ready and prepared is really important. All job descriptions have benefits. In volunteer management, the benefits are a little bit different. It's more about, what are they getting out of the experience? Is there something for their resume? Is there some of that team building we talked about? Tying this back to those motivational factors can be useful. Point of contact, and of course, a EEO or diversity statement is generally expected at this point in our organizations also. So moving on to recruitment, I've got a couple different concepts here and some specifics. As I started to discuss, the recruitment process needs to be built out from the position description in the top right here. The position description needs to be built from the organization's goals and needs. If you're not, to be able to identify what work you really need volunteers to do, you need to tie that back to the programmatic goals and programmatic needs. Perhaps you have staff or existing volunteers that are doing certain portions of the program, and you need to fill subsets of that work or other niches in that work. So identifying what those niches are before creating the position descriptions. Conceptually, you take that position description and identify the types of people who fit that type of position. So like I said, the picker, it could be just about anybody, so you could recruit wildly through all sorts of different media and mediums. However, if you want somebody with an educational background who has the ability to work weekdays with school children, that's a very different person, and where you're going to, who that is conceptually, and therefore where you're going to recruit them from looks very different than your general recruitment for more ubiquitous positions. Of course, then you have to tailor the message, tailoring it both to the type of individual. That past educator is different than trying to recruit the general person. Also, of course, recruiting in a newspaper or a PSA is very different than recruiting on social media. So tailoring your message to that. And then every time we go through this process of filling out volunteerism for an event, we do formal evaluation. Paul and I sit down and talk through, how did that go? Did we have enough people? What kinds of folks were there? Did we have too many of this type of folks or not enough of that types of folks to fit our needs? And to what degree can we shift that around at our next event? This poises you to be more successful going forward, so that when you have your new volunteers coming in, they're having a more enjoyable time, and therefore they stick around longer, and it makes your job easier. Moving on to recruitment locations. I have a fair amount of ideas here because, like I said, I've found over the years that this is the most interesting and useful to this group. I have the unicorn there because, you know, we're always looking for the perfect volunteer who can do all the things and will stick around forever and has the right disposition. Of course, magical unicorns only sometimes exist, and they're really, really hard to find. So let's go through a suite of ways that you might be able to find them. By far, the best recruitment tool you have is your existing volunteers. Even if it's a small group, these are the people that are dedicated to your cause, already interested, they're hopefully passionate, hopefully they're interesting. The easiest way that I've utilized this set of folks is whenever I have an event and I have our volunteers who have signed up already, oftentimes are returning volunteers, I'll send a note out to them with plenty of advanced warning saying, hey, don't forget to invite some coworkers or some friends or some family members. Actually, during COVID, this was a great recruitment tool for us. We brought in our tried and true volunteers who already knew the process that we use, so we didn't have the variables of new volunteers during COVID. That was a little bit too much for us to work through. But we invited those. We told our existing volunteers that they could bring their COVID pod with them to volunteer. And since a lot of those people hadn't been getting out of the house, they took that opportunity more so than ever in the past because they were, a lot of people were stuck at home. And so getting out, even with the people that they were stuck at home with, getting out and doing something new and different from the past few months really was enjoyable and interesting to them. I've seen research that shows that upwards of 70 to 80% of recruitment happens through word of mouth. So this is a great technique. Skills-based volunteers. So if you need that educator, look to the right education. This is Mr. Bill. He has a long history of chainsawing in large forests and whatnot, and we got him on our large woody debris team. So looking for people that have very specific skills, depending on what your project is, can be useful. Schools, as I noted earlier, can be a great way to recruit folks, especially if your program is set up to have younger adults or team-based work. Environmental organizations, either to recruit their staff or their volunteers or get the word out about your experiences. We at the Huron, we cross-promote stuff on social media for other organizations, as do they, depending on how busy we are during the year. But it's a great way to show that you're connected to other organizations. And some organizations do service work also. Of course, recreationalists are great for our groups. Knowing our local Trout Unlimited group is just amazing. They're really active in some subsets of our watershed. They're amazing to work with. They're highly competent in so many ways. We also work with our local liveries to do some recruitment and do some river cleanups and getting to the recreationalists through that organization or that portal that exists out there in the community already, instead of trying to create it on our own. Like I said earlier, corporate groups are a great way to recruit folks. Looking for your corporations. When I go in to try to assist other organizations in doing recruitment, one of the first places I look is at the Chamber of Commerce to see what the structure of the formal groups in the town are, and see what resources might be there. Contacting those corporate leaders or HR professionals can be a great in, or if you know that your volunteers work at a corporation, contacting them and asking them if there's a way to get in to recruit more of their coworkers. Depending on where you live in the state, court-ordered service is a great way to get folks out. We just go to our probation officers and let them know that we have opportunities that are appropriate for court-mandated service. It's working with each of these different groups or individuals has its own strengths and challenges, as especially do court-ordered service. But they can be great at doing certain types of labor and work for you. And sometimes I stick around really long. Paul always loves it that I put a picture of him under the core service photo here. And so I just wanted to make sure that everybody recognized that that is Paul's picture, even though I don't know that, I certainly don't know that he's had core orders. I'm kidding, I'm just on to recruitment locations. So we have all those recruitment locations on the left-hand column that I went through already. But there's all sorts of websites. This is where we get most of our good recruitment now, is through different websites. And this is just a laundry list of places that I place our volunteer events. We have, I don't know, 10 formal events per year, and it takes me, I get an intern or a volunteer to load those 10 events onto each of these websites. And it takes upwards of 40 hours to do that. So you might want to be a little bit careful with your time, but it's a great volunteer opportunity to help us do promotion and recruitment. I'll make this PowerPoint available to you all, and Paul will also send you the video so you can just grab these later on. And then there are traditional ways of recruitment. Local newspapers. Here in the Ann Arbor area, we kind of don't have any newspapers anymore, and so that doesn't, it's kind of rough. We sort of, but we still do use radio advertisements or radio pieces with local journalists that we know, and then flyers. We'll put flyers out at local businesses that have overlapping mission or recreation locations. That definitely does drum up a fair amount of folks. So that was sort of the meat of the things that I wanted to go through. Let me just finish rounding out the process by a few more items. The application process, or how you bring people into your volunteer experience, your events, is really important. It should be easy. Most of the time with a lot of organizations now, and I know not everybody on the call is with a formal organization who might have a website or whatnot, but having an application process that's online, that's really efficient, both for the prospective volunteer and for your group, is really important. I do a bunch of volunteer work with the local Sierra Club. We find Meetup to be a really easy way to recruit and get people to register, just through the meetup.com website. So that's an easy way to go about it. But you can also have a formal volunteer portal. You could use Google Forms to collect people's information. The other component of the application process is making sure that you have some sort of confirmation or get back with those folks who express interest fairly readily. A lot of our system, which is fairly developed, more so than most organizations, that are more so than small organizations. Our web portal for our database has an automatic notification to the volunteers. So they already, when they apply, they get a confirmation email. They get some information about what the event is, or when the next event might be if they're applying for sort of a general interest. Screening looks like really different things based on what the position is. If you've done a really good job at connecting the job description to the recruitment, screening should be really easy, because people will self-select. The right people will self-select. And I don't mean the right people like they're the wrong people, but the people that fit the need and their interest is aligned with what the work is. If you're not specific and accurate in what the job description duties are, or the background knowledge or the capacity of the volunteers is in your recruitment, you're much more likely to get people who don't really understand what the work is, and therefore have a bad time and take more management. And the screening process, especially if a position is pretty involved or very formal, you want to do a formal screening process. But for our one-off events, like a river cleanup, or just coming out once to be a picker at a benthic macroinvertebrate event, you don't necessarily need that screening time. And Polly asked if there's an age limit for our volunteers. It really depends on what you're doing, what the volunteers are doing. So being a picker, I really don't think that there's a too young. It's more about the capacity. We get parents that write to us on a pretty regular basis and ask if their kids can participate in our benthic events. I literally, this is what I say, and it is very true. I've seen 3-year-olds who can be pickers because their attention to detail is such that it works. It's the rare 3-year-old, but I've also seen 30-year-olds who can't. It's what the job what the job is. Of course, with youth, you want to make sure that you have appropriate connection and have the right parents on board and adults and things of that nature. Placement is processed if you're having a more involved program than a one-off event, and then evaluation, as I noted earlier. You also want to make sure that evaluation is part of the event itself. If a volunteer has had a complicated experience, they had what is seeming to be a bad experience for one reason or another, whether it's our fault as the infrastructure that we built around their event, or something that was non-controllable, like something that's environmental, that's out there in the world that we couldn't have controlled for. In either case, allowing them to come back to you and express their concern or let you know that something went poorly, and then engaging with them just enough that they see that you're going to take that bad experience or complicated experience and turn it into something useful. You're going to improve the program. That turns them from somebody who had a hard time to a part of the solution. It is very much like turning lemons into lemonade. And evaluations can be great at gathering anecdotal information or quotes for grant reporting, say, for MiCorps. Having those quotes and the information from your volunteers can be very meaningful and rich. It can also be used, some of those quotes and whatnot can be used for future recruitment. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the ladder of engagement. It's a concept that many volunteer managers use. When you get somebody who comes in like one time, and say you get a bunch of people that come in one time for an event, it's really hard to know who's going to stick around and for what reason. But if they have a really good time, they're likely to come back. After they do that one event a handful of times, many people are going to get bored of it. There are magical unicorns in every facet of the world, who might stick around on the same project for a really long time. But having opportunities for them to do something different. So ladder of engagement is sort of like increasing their expertise and their capacity, and working off of the knowledge that they built with you, so that they can do more. So going on to a slight leadership role in the same event is a great example. We have kids that have come to us with their family who will volunteer for a number of years, and then oftentimes a parent will come to me and say, Susan's really, really interested in this stuff. I know she's only in junior high, but I think she might want to be a biologist. And I'll say, okay, so you guys keep coming for a couple more years, and when she displays the ability to take on a slight leadership role, you and Susan come to our training for our leaders, and she'll become a leader, and you too will be the leaders of the team at that time. So she has some leadership development. When she gets big enough, stature-wise, we'll train her to be a collector and put her out in the stream, and then she can be the visual representation of the leader. And I've been at the Watershed Council for 10 years now. I've seen about 10 young people go through that whole thing, and they're graduating from college now, and they're going out to do amazing things, many of which in this area of work. Similar to the ladder of engagement is the idea of cross-pollination. If you have multiple different projects like river cleanups, youth education, that sort of stuff, getting your volunteers the opportunity to go between those programs, so they can stay with your organization but stay in different work, is very useful. I'll take a couple of questions. Nancy has a question. Do you have sample questions for volunteer evaluation? Paul, would you be willing to share our evaluation with the group? I didn't pull it up, but I feel comfortable just just sending out our evaluation to folks. The other thing that we have in our evaluation, which I'm very proud that Paul and I came up with about 10 years ago, was we asked if anybody that's out there that was on that team seemed like a natural leader or a good future leader or collector. It has helped us recruit more leaders by poaching people from the team, by their teammates, like referencing them or ratting them out, if you will. It's been a great useful tool for us to recruit more leaders. But yeah, Nancy, we'll send that to you.